The system was designed for a completely different world than we're in right now. Public education was designed at the end of the first industrial revolution 170 years ago. Our goal was to create factory workers that was designed on the principles of creating conformity and compliance. And yet now we have 21st century goals. We're talking about critical and creative thinking. We're talking about career community and life readiness. We're talking about 21st century learning skills. We're talking about all these things that we really want the students to develop. We have these 21st century goals and we're using 19th century pedagogy. And not even pedagogy, but we're embedding them within a 19th century institutional structure.
Hello and welcome to the Future is Clear, Teach Like It's 2045 webcast series. My name is Scott Carr from CESA 2. Today's topic area is how classrooms should be designed, the thinking classroom. Joining me today is Peter Liljedahl, who is the author of the Building Thinking Classrooms and multiple other books related to shaping the classroom. Peter is known for his innovative teaching methods and quite literally have started a movement of shifting how students can learn in the classroom. Super excited to have you aboard here. Thank you for taking the time. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks for having me. I'm always looking forward to talk to people who are whose minds are going in the same direction as mine.
Yeah. Well, I've read a little bit about, obviously, read a lot of your stuff, a little bit more online, and listened to a ton of podcasts that you've been on. I really appreciate how you are helping give back, though, too. I mean, you're not just writing about it. You're the type of person that's investing in, getting involved in schools, offering the opportunity to engage, and that really is having a lot of impact. I know our state here in Wisconsin really incorporates a lot of your work, and I'm just super excited to have you aboard. So let's just, I like to start out. Tell us how did you get where you're at? What's the origin story?
Uh, well, I'm a former high school math teacher. Fell in love with teaching on the first day of my school practicum, which is sort of kind of late to the game. I was already in the teaching program. Not sure if I wanted to be a teacher, but then once I was in the classroom, I thought I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. Destiny sort of intervened. Graduate studies eventually led to me being a professor. Fell in love with teaching teachers. And then I started to become really curious about what's actually going on in classrooms there's a sort of a serendipitous story to it, but it was this moment where I realized that the vast majority of our students spend the vast majority of their time not thinking when they're in the classroom. And that this is a problem because if students aren't thinking, they're not learning. And that coupled with the realization that there are institutionally normative structures in schools that actually sort of prevent students from having opportunities to think. So it's not just that the students aren't thinking, the system isn't really designed for thinking. The system of school was designed for conformity and compliance. And that's what it does really well. And then that realization that if we actually want students to think, and I don't think I'm alone in that, then we're going to actually have to change some of these normative structures. And that started the 25-year project that I've been on ever since, which is building thinking classrooms. Like, what is it that we actually have to change structurally in education and in the classroom to not only enable students to think, but to necessitate thinking, to get them thinking, to keep them thinking. And that's where I'm at.
Yeah, that's great. I know that. Quick question around that. How long did you do it as a teacher to where you evolved into, maybe writing about it or, what it is?
So this project started actually while I was a doctoral student. I was already out of the classroom. But the research was in classrooms. The research involved over 400 teachers. So I had actually been tinkering with, in hindsight, what turned out to be sort of the same thing while I was in the classroom. So, for example, one of the hallmarks of building thinking classrooms is that we're going to have the students working in groups up at whiteboards. Well, it turns out I had actually been doing that as a classroom teacher, but I had been doing it because it felt right. I needed to get the students active and that they weren't active when they were sitting down. And in hindsight, of course, the fact that I was doing that myself led to vertical whiteboards being one of the variables I pursued when I started doing the research. And in particular, when we were researching what is the optimal workspace for students. So I wasn't a priori declaring that whiteboards was the right place to work, but it was definitely a variable. And then the research showed that that was the best place we could get the students working. So I was doing group work, not random groups. I was having the students work at whiteboards. I was using thinking tasks all the time with my students. So a lot of this stuff was sort of bubbling up from sort of just what feels right. And I don't think I'm alone in that. I think there's lots of
No.
teachers who are pursuing different ways of trying to get students active in their learning. But when it was sort of all pulled together, it became an empirical study, then I think it started to gain some traction and some validity.
Yeah, that's a great story. I kind of can equate the same thing. As you know, my background now is around that career community connected type engagement line of work. And I kind of did the same thing. I was a special ed teacher for about 20 years, and I recognized our students were not only engaged in the classroom, which I could kind of leverage that and get them to the finish line, but they certainly weren't engaged in being able to transition out and have something, a viable plan for themselves that really put them into a good situation. And that's one of the things I really, really respect about your work is that we're able to kind of bring it together. And like I said before, I utilize a lot of your strategies as I help teachers kind of discover, really what they should be doing. Which takes me to, I like to kind of break out the pod here into why, what, and how. So in regards to the why, to move this direction, we do need systems change, I really believe. And I've heard you say this, teachers teach with absolute knowledge, absolute certainty. And it's not inviting to join in. It's not inviting to think about it. It's not inviting to participate with. That really hit home when I heard you talk about that. I'm like, yes, when I'm in classrooms, that's what I see. And
Yeah.
and teachers kind of don't know that they're leaning and moving this direction sometimes, or that they're teaching that way. But talk a little bit about why does our system need to shift, need to change?
Okay, so those are actually two kind of different questions. So the first part of that is like this idea that teachers teach with absolute knowledge. This was actually something that was interesting that emerged out of the research. So, spending a lot of time in classrooms doing this research, and not just doing the research, like I'm teaching in classrooms. I do about 120 lessons a year. This week, I taught in two different classrooms in the Czech
Wow.
Republic. The week before, I was teaching in St. Louis. So I'm in classrooms all the time. And one of the things that we realized was that and it was actually when we were doing the research on how to have whole class discussion inside of a thinking classroom where we're kind of bringing it together. We started to notice that when we had students present their own solution to the class, nobody listened. But when we had students present somebody else's solution to the class, so like looking at the board and trying to decode what they had done, everybody was listening. And that led us down this path to what is it about the discourse that is happening there? And one of the things that it revealed was, and I kind of give this example. So I'm going to make two statements now. You tell me which one is more inviting. So statement number one, this is what we did. So there's statement one.
Yeah.
Statement two is, I think what they were doing was.
Yeah. Well, obviously, right? Second one, because,
Yeah.
right, it's the thinking portion of it.
Right.
Well,
And it's not just the thinking, it's that invitation comes from the tentativeness of the statement, right? When the statement is absolute, this is what we did. There isn't anything rough about it. It's all smooth, it's all polished. There's nothing to grab onto. But when the statement is made in that tentative fashion, I think maybe what they were doing, I wonder what would happen if, like in that sort of tentative discourse,
yeah,
it's very inviting to jump in there. And when we stepped back from that, when we realized that, and we started to watch interactions in classrooms, what we started to notice was when the students are working in groups together, they're often using this tentative language,
yeah,
and which is, I think, what makes having students talking to each other in groups so valuable. And then, contrary to that, when we're watching a teacher give a lecture, it's very absolute in the statements that they're making, and the students are not able to grab onto anything because it is rough. It's not inviting them into the conversation. It's not a dialogue, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple of the as I listen to some of your podcasts, and obviously as I've engaged in your books, I've tried a few things over the last since school year started. And what you're talking about really, really makes a difference. Like the one marker idea that you use. You've created circumstances where students have to lean into each other and have to collaborate, because at the end of the day, that collaboration is huge.
It
Um,
is.
yeah.
And it doesn't happen naturally, right?
No.
Like we like to think that collaboration is just a natural developmental sort of engagement. And it would be nice if it was. And it is, of course, in
Yeah.
certain settings. But if we want collaboration to happen for everybody in this moment, we're going to have to shape the environment. And having students sit
Yeah.
in desks next to each other doesn't actually invite collaboration. It's funny because, I work all the way down from kindergarten up.
Yeah.
And in kindergarten, what we notice is that kids come into school, and this is something we've known for decades, that kids come to
Mhm.
school playing in parallel. That's sort of where they're developmentally ready, which means that they'll work alongside each other, but they won't work with each other. And then we get them eventually working towards what we call polite turn taking, which is where they'll share a resource, but they won't necessarily collaborate. And then eventually we get them to collaboration, which is where what one student says or does affects what the other student says or does. So now we're collaborating. And what's interesting, if we think of that continuum from parallel play to turn taking to collaboration, then we got ninth graders sitting in desks that are paired up side by side. What are we actually promoting there?
Yeah.
Are we promoting collaboration? No, we're actually promoting parallel play, right? Like it's like this was part of your other question. Like, in what ways does the system, the institution need to be changed, and why? And it's because the system was designed for a completely different world than we're in right now. Public education was designed at the end of the first industrial revolution 170 years ago. Our goal was to create factory workers that was designed on the principles of creating conformity and compliance. And yet now we have 21st century goals. We're talking about um, critical and creative thinking. We're talking about career community and life readiness. We're talking about 21st century learning skills. We're talking about all these things that we really want the students to develop. We have these 21st century goals, and we're using 19th century pedagogy. And not even pedagogy, but we're embedding them
Right.
within a 19th century institutional structure.
Right. Right. You're nailing it. Exactly. Let's talk a little bit about the what and kind of what it looks like. Again, as I've listened to you talk and some of the other pods and stuff like that, I like the statement you make. We cannot actually achieve skills without thinking. Learning and engagement skills are the byproducts of the process, and I really think the process is vital, right? Kids going through the process rather than being compliant and sitting and listening. So what does this look like in that type of classroom?
All right. So let's say you walked into a thinking classroom. Let's say that you walked in 10 minutes into the class already, right? The lesson's up and running. You walk in. What would you see? You would see all the students in groups of three working at vertical whiteboards spaced around the room.
Mhm.
Um, they would be working collaboratively within those groups. If it's like if we're talking about a well-run, a well-executed thinking classroom, then everybody is engaged. There is only one marker, which means that they have to talk to each other.
Love that. Yeah.
Um, you'll also see that it's not just that they're not just engaging with them with the students in their group, they're also engaging with the groups around them, both passively and actively. So they may look around the room to get an idea, but they may ask a group next to them what it is that they're doing, and then they'll take that back to their own board. They're kind of owning the learning, right?
Mm.
You'll see the teacher moving around, and the teacher's job is to support them in whatever task that they've set, right? The teacher is determined to get everyone across the finish line, and they're going to do that by
Mhm.
providing sort of differentiated support. Like this group here needs an extension. This group needs to just be left alone. And this group over here is going to need a hint. And in fact, they're going to need the third hint in 2 minutes because
Right.
this group just needs a little bit more,
Yep.
right? These
Yep.
two groups need to be paired up temporarily while the teacher interacts with them a little bit to kind of get them back on path because they were maybe out in the weeds a little bit and then get them back on the boards. So it's kind of like the teacher is 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 driving the momentum in the room, right? Like the curiosity,
Yeah.
the interest, and the pursuit of the answer to the question that the teacher has posed is the main driver, but the teacher is having to sort of uh, differentiate that support. So
Yeah.
that's what you're going to see if you're walking in, right? And it could be a one big rich task that they're working on, or it could be a series of tasks where they're each task is getting a little harder than the previous one until the students are working at really high level, developing understanding of things. Then you'll see that's what you'd see if you walked into the middle. If you were there at the beginning, you would see that the teacher had sort of huddled the students around them as the teacher gave the task of the day. There could have been some just-in-time review in that moment. The students are then randomized, usually using cards to get going at the boards. If you're there at the end of the lesson, that last third of the lesson, what you would see is that the teacher is now taking back control of the lesson,
Mhm.
making sure that everyone is going to get what they need to out of this lesson. So it's not their time to do a lecture. What they're going to do is they're going to lift up the ideas that the students had during the lesson and use those to sort of drive the collective learning of the whole class towards the finish line. And that's sort of what it
Mhm.
looks like, right? That's what you would experience if you were in there.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I know that you also talk a little bit about kind of how you can consolidate lessons. Can you talk a little
Mhm.
bit about what that can look like within this
Okay.
environment?
So we call this a closing of the lesson, and the
Okay.
closing of the lesson is the last third, and it is the most important part of the lesson,
Okay.
right? When we have students working to try to figure things out on their own, it would be nice if they all figure it out on their own, but the reality is they're not going to all figure it out on their own. And even if they do, they're figuring out, they're sort of conclusions are not all gold, right? Like this is one of the things people have to understand about building thinking classrooms. Having kids work at the whiteboards is not what it's all about. What it's all about is activating the thinking, getting them to start meaning making,
Hmm.
and then in that last third of the lesson, turning that meaning making into meaning made and turning the thinking they were doing into learning, right? It's about the technical term is reifying all of their thoughts into sort of a concrete conclusion. And that's where we got to take back control. It sort of follows. There's three ways that we can consolidate or close a lesson. One is consolidation.
Okay.
Consolidation is where we may gallery walk and look at student work, or we may do some new questions together, lifting up the ideas that the students have developed and figured out. Um, so there's consolidation. Then there's meaningful notes or note making. So
Mhm.
now that the students have sort of as a class, we've sort of reified the learning of the lesson. We need to record that. We need to take that learning and really lock it down by making some notes. And we do that collectively. They do it in their groups at the whiteboards and then capture it either with photographs or sitting down and writing it out in their notebook. And then they really need to do some check your understanding questions, which is okay, so great. You were able to do it in your groups. Now let's see if you can do it on your own. Because there's a difference between collective knowing and doing and individual knowing and doing.
Yep.
And although the world that they're going to walk into is driven by collective efficacy,
Hmm.
school still operates for better or for worse on individual efficacy. So it's like, okay, and which is probably one of the tensions that you're working in as
Oh
you're
yeah.
doing this career and life readiness, right? Like school is still praying at the altar of the individual student performance. But the
Hmm.
reality is that life readiness is really about how you can function as a collective.
Yeah, 100% right. And that can be the frustration a lot of the times out of our teachers that we're working with, even leadership, because they see the need to drive how would you say this control of the classroom to know that this one particular student, all the students, but this one particular student is learning. And when
Hmm.
you move into groups, because that's one of the things that I get is because I do the same thing. The collaborative groups, I call them collab teams. We give roles, responsibilities.
Hmm.
So there's that risk, the accountability to active engagement. But that how do you get past that part of it with collaborate the collaborative groups where teachers feel comfortable that the measurement or the assessment that everybody's learning and progressing.
So this is, so I talk about these cultural hangovers, right? So
Mm,
one of the cultural hangovers of education is that part of every lesson has to be A, rehearsal for the assessment, and B, there has to be an opportunity to measure individual student learning, right?
yeah.
And nobody says this, but this is just sort of a cultural hangover. And if you look at lessons even today, you see remnants of that, right?
Yeah.
The exit
Yeah.
ticket, the
Yeah.
like like all of this is pervasive in that space. And yet what we found was like in a thinking classroom, like we can have a day that is just a learning day. Like let's just focus on learning, right? Like we're
Mhm.
learning collectively. We're transferring that from sort of the collective efficacy to individual efficacy, but the teacher isn't hounding that individual accountability or that individual grade every single day
Mm.
because we're just learning. Today's a learning day. We can have assessment days and we can have data gathering days. And that's not to say that I can't gather data on how a student is enacting their learning today. But the goal of that day is not to assess the learner. I just happen to notice that this student is really demonstrating their learning today, and I may make a record of that. But it's that sort of cultural hangover of, well, no, the only thing that is important is what they learned individually. Yeah, learning individually is important. I'm never going to deny that. But learning is the end product. It is a
Yeah.
byproduct of the
Yeah.
process, as you said earlier, right? Like learning is not the process. Right? The process is the
Right.
engagement, the thinking, the meaning making. It's that process. Learning is what comes out of that. If we don't have the process, we're not going to get the learning.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. You say it really well because a lot of the questions I'll get when I go in about, and help kind of redesign and get into collab teams and things like that. They say, I have to be in this every day. And I'm like, no, use some creativity, right, around this. There's a lot of resources out there to help guide you in that direction. And no, you don't have to do it every single day. There's multiple ways of doing it. One thing that I found really interesting, and I had not thought about this at all until I came across your work, is I like how you have students standing, right? And so where did that come from? I mean, after hearing it, I'm like, yeah, that makes a ton of sense, right? Also the one marker, also, you can't write your own idea. All these things were just natural tactics for just some
Yeah.
very organic engagement happening. But talk a little bit about the standing part.
Right. So there was a moment in my research where what we were starting to discover was that as long as when we were making small changes, we weren't seeing a change in student behavior,
Mm,
right? And and of course we're not going to, because when you make a small change, and we actually this was actually one of the byproducts of this research was it turns out that if you make a small change, over 50% of the students don't even know you've made a small change,
mm,
right? Like so, and if they don't even know you've made a change, why would they change their behavior?
mm,
And one of the things we have to realize is that if we're trying to change our teaching practice, the students have to change their behavior. Otherwise, we can't sustain the change. We certainly can't advance the change. So, so what we realized was the change had to be noticeable. The change had to be sort of central, right? And that led us down this sort of path that one of the teachers I actually worked with called George Costanza teaching from Seinfeld. And it was this sort of realization that, look, if this isn't working, let's just do the exact opposite. And there was a period of time, right? Like if students are used to sitting, let's make them stand up. If students are used to asking questions, we won't answer their questions. If students are used to working on their own, we're going to make them work in groups. If they're used to writing on paper, we're going to make them write on whiteboards. Like it was this sort of contrarian approach
Mhm.
um, that got us getting the students standing. But then when you realize that this was having a powerful effect, you start to try to understand why that is. And okay, so we know, right? We know from research that when students are standing, this is a physiology research, when they're standing, when they activate their core and they take an active stance, they have a more active mind, right? Active stance, active mind, passive stance, passive mind,
Right.
right? And we know this from physiology research, but it also turns out to be true psychologically. So by the time a student comes to you, whatever grade you're working, they have literally had thousands of experiences where they have been in a passive stance and been asked to be passive in their learning. So they've actually developed this psychological correlation between passive stance, passive sitting with passive learning. I'm just going to be told what to do. And
Mm-hmm.
now, if you come in, and this was something we learned early on in the research, and we change nothing about the environment, we can't suddenly expect the students to start
Right.
behaving differently. So, like,
Hmm.
we can come in with the best task in the world, but if we leave them sitting down, they're still going to bring that sort of passive learning to the situation. So it was both physiological and it was psychological. But then it was also this interesting, what we ended up calling studenting behaviors. And one of the studenting behaviors that we've noticed is that when students are sitting, they don't listen to us. They
Wow.
just
Wow.
don't. And we joke about it. We say, yeah, it's because their ears are vented through their butts, but it's not that. It's that we've actually trained them to not listen because we will repeat ourselves 6 times and they've learned they don't have to listen because it's going to come multiple times. But when we stand them up, not only do we have that active stance, active mind, we have changed all of their associations, right? Those sorts of associated behaviors that come with sitting disappear because now they have to bring new behaviors. And we get them into a huddle, which means that they're closer. And now it feels like we've equalized the power in the room because we're all standing and we're closer. We're in a huddle. That feels important, right? And we just kind of redefine what this is.
Wow. That's really, really great. It's
And
funny.
there was one other part of it that
Yeah.
emerged. And this, I just want to say this
Yeah,
because
go
this
ahead.
turned out, so that's just in the launch. Now we get them up to the whiteboard. So, and this piece of research this was like, this was a major breakthrough for us. And we were trying to understand why is it that standing at the whiteboard is so much better than sitting with a whiteboard at your table. And what we started to learn, and it took over 2 years to get this result, was it turns out that when students are sitting, they feel anonymous.
Mhm.
And the further they sit from the teacher, the more anonymous they feel. And the more things are between them and the teacher, like other students, the more anonymous they feel. And when students feel anonymous, they disengage. And that's both a conscious and a subconscious act,
Right.
right? And what happened was when we had them stand up at the whiteboards, they didn't feel anonymous,
Wow.
right? They didn't feel like they were on display or that they were being publicly outed. They just didn't feel anonymous. And so they didn't disengage. So like you couple all this together and it kind of fits the paradigm of what I call results first research. We got the result first. Like we knew that standing up was better. And then it took years to figure out why.
Wow. Wow. I can speak personal experience. I mean, conscious effort to sit way over here into the back. I just was
Right.
not an engaged student. I could not connect. I couldn't see the relevance of school at all. But just thinking here as you're talking about this, and I can imagine I would have been a different student for sure. I would have found my strengths. I would have found, I say it this way when I've been on a few pods and I talk about, students don't know their purpose. And boy, the work you're doing allows students to find a purpose in their learning, a purpose in the participation, things of that nature, which is
Yeah.
outstanding.
And they get to shape their identity without
Oh, big
having
time.
to shape it according to the sort of cookie cutter expectations that
Yeah.
a seated sort of fronted classroom offers them, right? They don't all fit into that mold, but
No, no.
like having a thinking classroom, It's a pretty jagged, uneven, big mold for lots of students to fit into.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. Let me ask you this, and I know you could probably talk for an hour at least on this, but the assessment, the grading, one of the pieces that I like to help teachers with is is to collect have a collection of testimonials, opportunities, experiences that kids can go, here's who I am.
Mm.
So, right, rather than a letter grade. So we do portfolios rather than. So where does that align with your work, in relationship to it?
So yeah, you're asking a really important question here, right? Like, and it's so what my work around grading was how do we fit this sort of 19th century idea of that somehow we can pin a number to a student
Yeah.
into this space, which is really much broader and so on and so forth. So that kind of grading that we all sort of labor under is what we have to do. It's not necessarily what's best, but it's what we have to do. And in in the larger sense of life in the world, it's kind of ludicrous, right? That
Mhm.
this idea that we're going to take everything a student has learned in the last 3 months and we're going to put one number on it. And then we're going to take everything they've learned in 10 months and we're going to put one number on it. And then we're going to take everything they've learned in 8 different subjects and we're going to compress it all together into a grade point average. And somehow that grade point average is a measure of who this student is, when the reality is that this student is this complex being who has been able to demonstrate their learning in so many different ways about so many different things, and yet it all gets reduced down to this one single number. And where else in the world does that happen, right? Like, it doesn't happen in life very often in other settings, right? So the fact that we have to create a number or a letter grade is something that we have to do. It's not necessarily what we want to do. What I say is, like, it doesn't matter what you do in your classroom 3 times a year, you still have to dock with the mothership. And so this is what we have to do. If I had my way and I got to decide what a report card would look like, it would be um, disaggregated, right? It would be like the
Mhm.
back of a baseball card. It would
Right.
have the
Mm.
statistics, the stats on the
Love
student,
that.
right? Across a whole bunch of different metrics. And content could be one of them, but there could be so many other things. And in some places they get to do that, but in most places we have to reduce it down to one thing. But that doesn't mean that that reduction into one thing can't be done thoughtfully.
Mhm.
So, grading in a thinking classroom, when a teacher gets to that point, is really about a philosophical shift away from point gathering. This idea that we have a quiz today and it's 15 points, and let's see how many points you get. And then we have a test that's worth 40 points. Let's see how many points you get. To one of data gathering, which is like where we're running around, we're trying to find evidence of learning, and then we're trying to record that evidence. It's basically standards or outcomes-based grading, where we're looking for evidence of learning as opposed to collecting up like points that the student
Yeah.
gathered.
Wow. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Smart.
And it's again, it like if I could, and if you're doing a data gathering, you're right there. Like, you're keeping the baseball card. Like, if you look at someone who's doing data gathering, you look at their grade book throughout the term, it looks like a baseball card,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's all the stats on the student, and then it's only at report card time that we have to suck those stats down to a letter grade, only because that's what the mothership wants. But we're keeping the baseball card throughout the year.
That's a I'm gonna write that down. I'm stealing that for sure. And let just so you know, I batted under 200 all through my school years
But
for
that was
sure.
only one line on your baseball card.
Yeah, 100% right. Yeah. Yeah, hey, I was easily somebody that could hit 350, right? I mean, if you're equating that to a grade point average.
Yeah.
But I was under 200 as I
Yeah.
went through it. It just, I mean, all the things you're saying.
Because really they were blending that mark with how many bases you stole and how many errors you made
Yeah.
and how many times you were struck out, right? Like,
Right.
they're blending all of this stuff together.
Right. 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 And how the playing field, if you look at it that way, how the playing field was created for me. It
Yeah.
just, right? Yeah, it was no creativity. It's so
Yeah,
so
it's an interesting metaphor. You were
yeah,
forced to play center field when really you were really sort of uh had an affinity for a shortstop or something
yeah.
like that, right?
Well, I could have been on the mound pitching, I think.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. Kind of let's talk about this a little bit. Maybe you have some data around it, but it's you know, I see what you've designed really critical when it comes to what we call in our world of work here is the durable skill building. And so critical thinking, collaboration, problem solving, all of those types of things. Our conversation with our business partners. And by the way, I've been in a bunch of economic development meetings. 'Cause my work crosses over into the community to create that overall ecosystem. And when I dove into your book and reached out to you, I in one of my last meetings with a bunch of economic development people, I brought your name up, showed them the book, and I said, "This is something we need to dive into." And there was a ton of curiosity around it
Hmm.
because what I said was, "This is what the classroom looks like." And one of the it was interesting. One of the business partners said, "That's what business is. That's what we do. What he
Right.
created is what we do."
Yeah.
And so my question here is, you know, we are looking for a design that helps build durable skills within the school system. You've created that. So what are those durable skills that we're seeing built within a thinking classroom?
Okay, so great question. And durable is an important point, right? Like if we work on problem solving in February, do you think we're really building a durable skill of problem solving? And if we work on and often what happens is we have these skills approach. We in a lot of different places we call them processes. We may call them um competencies. We have a
Yeah,
lot of different names for them. What we don't have is a way to think of them developmentally, right?
yeah,
So a lot of curricula have these sorts of indicators, like for time immemorial, we've had this sort of the learning habits or right, the work habits, but we don't think about them developmentally. We even if we do measure it, we kind of just say, yeah, they're good at this, but we didn't actually work on it. We just
yeah.
they're either good at it or not. So we have to think about it developmentally. So what are some of these things, right? Perseverance,
Mm,
critical thinking, reflective thinking, patience, problem solving, um, endurance, right? Stick-withedness, curiosity,
mm,
productive struggle. Like these are the things that are actually being developed, right? Um, Tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to work with anybody, right? Like
yeah,
these are the skills that are being used day in and day out. Going slow, slowing down and making sure your team is with you, right? These are the skills that are working at work every day in a thinking classroom. And when we talk about them being enduring, if we're working on it for a week in March, it's not enduring. But if we're working on it 200 days a year, it's enduring and it's development, right? It's
yeah.
developing across this arc as they're getting better at it. So those are the things. And we have data that reports that these things are improving in students. Like when we ask teachers, like, how have you seen the improvement of students across these? Like, almost 100% of teachers
Yeah.
who are doing this are reporting that they've seen improvements in their students. The big one, the one that has almost nothing to do with what our research was that surprised us, was the students are taking responsibility for their learning,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're
Mm-hmm.
owning it. Empathy is emerging. Like it's all of these sorts of things that are natural byproducts of having students thinking together.
Mm-hmm. It's just outstanding stuff, man. I get goosebumps when you said that before. I'm like, this is like what we need to be doing. I mean, it's
Yeah, and it's
yeah,
and let's be clear, it's not just a byproduct. There's an entire
yeah,
chapter dedicated to the
yeah.
development of these as well. And that chapter, by the way, and this is going to be interesting because I've been analyzing, it's chapter 12. Chapter 12 is how do we evaluate what we value, which
Mm-hmm.
is like, hey, if you value perseverance, let's start evaluating it. If we value risk taking or collaboration or empathy or perseverance, let's evaluate it. And I don't mean evaluate it like let's produce a letter grade, but let's give feedback on it. Let's treat it as a developmental skill. Let's actually work on it and use evaluation as a way to move it forward, right? That's chapter 12. I've been analyzing some quantitative data, trying to understand which practices have the biggest impact on student individual performance, right?
Wow.
That I'm just trying to understand this, right? Not that individual performance is really what I'm going for on standardized assessment, but I just got curious about it. The number one practice for improving students' individual performance on standardized assessment is evaluate what you value. Is if we start focusing on these enduring skills that you're talking about, that is actually the thing that drives student performance more than
Wow.
anything else.
Wow. Wow. That says a lot. And it aligns too, Peter, to this. So I kind of discovered as I've been doing the work I've been doing more deeply over the last 2, 3 years, when I've been getting in co-teaching, if you would, modeling with teachers,
Yeah.
at the end of it, always the two things I hear out of the educators that I've worked with after they do it for a while, and it's similar, a lot of similarities to the stuff that I'm doing that you're talking about. I mean, it's the reshaping of the inside of the classroom, how we approach education and teaching. But what I get is the durable skills.
Mhm.
They're in they're part of what they do. It's not like teachers will say, how do they need to know these terms? They need to know what collaboration is. I got to teach
Oh
it.
yeah.
It's like, so we go and
It'd be
they,
nice if they came out of the box that way. They just
yeah,
don't. We're gonna have
no,
to figure it out.
right. But going through the design of like a thinking classroom allows the kids to naturally learn it.
Yes.
Teachers are not, I say, don't let them sit in straight rows and you stand up in front and tell them what collaboration is. Let them experience it.
And then tell you what it is.
It's exactly it. Yeah,
No,
they'll
that's,
show it.
and I was doing this in the classroom yesterday. We were working on collaboration, specifically working on collaboration with ninth graders, right? And we had an arrow at the top of the board where collaboration was on one end and turn taking was in the other. And we wanted them to get to to
Yeah.
collaboration. And every single group I was
Wow.
interacting with them during the lesson. Hold up your finger, point at the arrow. Where are you? Make the mark. What are we going to do to improve? And like I had ninth graders saying, we're going to talk to each other before we take action.
Wow. Yeah.
I had a ninth grader say, we're going to make eye contact as we talk to each other. Like it was
Um,
unbelievable. We're
yeah.
going to ask each other questions before we start writing on the board. These are ninth graders, right? Like they're
Yeah.
telling us what collaboration looks like and how to improve it, but only because we're making it important. Right.
Yeah.
And why is this having such a big impact on student individual performance? Because we've always thought of student individual performance as the goal. It is a byproduct,
Right.
right? It is a byproduct. If we work on the process, we're going to get the byproduct, right? So we're working on the process here. We're not just saying we're working on the process, we're actually working on it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Agreed. 100%. That's some great stuff. The other thing that we get is the self-efficacy not only out of teachers but students,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And the just the rejuvenation of excitement that I get with teachers, and that they want to be doing this type of work is really, really
Yeah.
great. We don't have a ton of time, but I do want to ask this. If you were to give, I like the purpose of teaching is not teaching, it's learning. What a great statement. I'm going to put that in a white paper that I write and put your name right next to it because it is ideal. But what would be your suggestion, your advice to a teacher or even a school that wants to move this direction, but maybe just are stumbling and can't or feel like they can't?
Um, okay, so read the book, right? And
Oh,
if read
yeah,
the
for
book
sure.
and follow what's in the book, and you're going to get a lot of tools to
Yeah.
get there, right? Like we have a lot of tools for the what we have to teach. We don't have a lot of tools for the how to teach. So
Mhm.
my book is a collection of tools for how to teach, how to get students thinking. So that's a great place. Um, if you're at the point where you're trying to figure out if you want to go in this direction or not, ask yourself, what was the reason you got into teaching? What was kind of student you wanted to create when you first started out in this career? And what do you think the purpose of education is in your jurisdiction? Like, what is the global goal? Like, what are we trying to achieve here? Right? Students seem to spend a lot of time in school, but when you look at the amount of time they spend in school compared to their life trajectory,
Mhm.
it's less than 15%, right?
Yeah.
It's 20, maybe 20%. It's not like like what is it that school is meant to actually prepare students for? And is it actually doing that? Right? Because the world is changing and the world has changed a lot. And a lot of curriculum documents that haven't been updated in the last 5 years state what that, the like every single state says that
Hmm.
the goal of education is career and life readiness. Every
Hmm.
single state in the US says that that is the goal of education. Can we honestly say that in the world of AI, we're a quarter of the way through into the 21st century, that what we're doing now and how we're doing it is actually preparing students for the world they're about to walk into?
Hmm. Right. Very well said. And I'll say this, we must be related because you must be my cousin from Canada because that's the starting point when I go in because I start with the leadership and shifting mindsets and reculturing. That's my starting point. I don't start in
Yeah.
classrooms right away. That's year 2 or 3. And I ask, what is the fundamental purpose of the educational system? And then I say, let's go in and ask a student what their purpose is and see if it lines up to what your answer was.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're not going to get that. So
Oh
what's
no.
that telling
We
us?
never got that.
Yeah,
We had some, especially around homework, we had some really interesting research around that.
I
And
can
then like
imagine.
let's talk to a recent grad or let's talk to industry. Like you mentioned this earlier. There was an interesting sort of crisis that happened in Canada a few years ago where industry, right? Um, employers sort of were up in arms because what was happening was that they were hiring these students who were coming out of university with really good grades and they were spending 6 months training them and then firing them.
Mm.
And it was this realization that these students they're being prepared for something, but it
Right.
wasn't the thing that they needed. And I'm not saying that education should only cater to post-secondary and education shouldn't only cater to engineers or retail or whatever, right? Like education needs to create a broad experience for students, but it's creating, are we creating students that are ready for any of those things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because from where I sit, what we're preparing students for sometimes is a 19th century factory,
Yeah. Agreed.
and they don't exist anymore.
Yeah. No. Right. Well said. Well said. We are behind. We are behind. Yeah.
But we're catching up, right?
Yeah.
And
Great.
I think we're going to move. I think it's going to move. I think it's going to get
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing, I don't know, a lot of people call me a disruptor in education, and I admire that because it's like, yeah, I didn't see relevance. My own 2 kids who are now in their early 20s, I think the same thing. And so we do need to, transform what we're doing. But let me, we've taken up a lot of your time, and I really appreciate it. But couple things here real quick. Um, the ability to move this work forward is amazing. Great job. Anything happening in your world that you'd like to share with us, take the opportunity.
um,
Anything new? Anything
oh,
to share?
right.
I,
Like I'm always working on stuff.
yeah.
Um, the last 3 years I've been working really hard on what the closing of the lesson looks like, and
Mm,
then creating two really powerful resources for math teachers that they can use for when they want to build their thinking classroom in the task books, K to 5 and 6 to 12. The 6 to 12 one just came out a month ago. Um, it's the new stuff that I'm working on right now is the role of technology, the role
mhm.
of sort of um, math trauma, math therapy. I'm working with colleagues on that, equity. Like all of these things are things that are sort of front of mind right now. And also, what does thinking classroom look like across the curriculum? So that is something
Smart.
that is of great interest to me. I'm here in Norway right now. On Tuesday, I'm doing a workshop just outside Oslo that's going to be cross-curricular. It's not math.
Wow.
It's like, what does this look like in language arts, social studies, science? And it's, I've done the research on this. I know what it looks like in those settings as well, but I just haven't written anything on it yet. So
Yeah.
it's all coming. It's all coming. But what's new, I guess, is that just trying to create access for teachers who are interested in this. And this podcast is one of those. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, you betcha. I thank you for joining us. Last question I always ask is, in our tagline, it's teach like it's 2045. What do you think education is going to look like in 2045, or what should it look like?
Yeah. So, the cynicist in me says that if I use induction, it's going to look the way it looks now, except
Mhm.
we're going to have a little bit better technology and a little bit better furniture. But because if you look at the last 170 years, that's kind of been the trajectory. But the optimist in me says that education is going to be redefined. We're going to rethink seriously what it is that we're teaching. I'm hoping we move to a more sort of what I call competency-based driven curriculum, where the content we teach is just the context, and that the real thing that we're driving for are those, enduring skills. That's what we're trying to develop, right? We still need context in order to develop those, but the goal flips. The goal shifts from the content to the competencies.
Mhm.
And that we're preparing students for it's always going to be an uncertain world. The world is always going to be shifting, but we're preparing students to be tolerant and to take on the challenge of that shifting world.
Yeah, well said. That's exciting. I really appreciate you taking the time today and joining us. If anybody would want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Go to the Building Thinking Classrooms website, buildingthinkingclassrooms.com. You'll find a ton of information about it, about me, and how to connect.
I've been there many times. I certainly appreciate it. Well, Peter, thank you again for joining us, and keep up the great work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you bet. And as we depart, everybody, remember the future is clear. Take care.